Welcome to today's deep dive. You know, thousands of years before the smartphone was even a concept,
Long before.
right, long before, ancient desert monks were actually mapping out the exact biological cure for your modern digital burnout.
It's fascinating.
It really is. So think of your brain like a car engine. The source document we are diving into today argues that the modern world has us constantly redlining that engine.
Yeah, pushing the RPMs right into the danger zone from the moment you wake up.
Exactly, right until the moment we fall asleep.
Yeah.
And today we are looking at the manual for how to finally idle. So, okay, let's unpack this. We are exploring a really dense paper that sits right at this intersection of modern neuroscience and ancient theology.
Right, we're looking at the trendy clinical concept of the dopamine detox.
Yes, and discovering why the structural remedy for our digital exhaustion was mapped out by spiritual giants millennia ago.
The paper we are analyzing essentially argues that cutting-edge neurobiology and ancient scriptural tradition are prescribing the identical medicine.
The exact same cure.
Yes, for the identical human condition.
Yeah.
But, to understand the cure, we really have to thoroughly understand the mechanism of the disease first.
Which is our modern environment.
Right. We live in an environment of unprecedented, just engineered stimulation. I mean, we don't need to rehash the fact that phones are distracting. Everyone listening already knows that.
We feel it every day.
Exactly. What this source does is drill down into the mesolimbic pathway, so the reward center of the brain.
Right. To show us the structural damage being done by the constant barrage of microstimuli.
Right.
Because the paper details how every ping, every scroll, every algorithmic novelty triggers dopamine.
Yes, it does.
But it's not just that we get a rush of pleasure, is it? I mean, the text makes a point of clarifying that dopamine is actually the neurotransmitter responsible for motivation.
Motivation and anticipation, yes.
Yeah.
That distinction completely changes how we view our entire digital behavior.
Oh, so.
Well, dopamine is not the reward itself. It is the biological incentive system that compels us to seek the reward.
Ah, so it drives the search.
Exactly. From an evolutionary standpoint, it kept early humans moving forward, seeking food, seeking shelter, seeking social connection.
It's the chemical of craving.
Right. But our neurobiology was built for an environment of scarcity. We now inhabit an environment of hyperabundance.
And our brains are just buckling under the weight of it.
They really are.
It's like building up a tolerance to incredibly spicy food.
Mhm.
You start out and a tiny dash of hot sauce is thrilling.
Right. Just a drop.
But eventually, a jalapeno doesn't even register on your palate. You need habaneros, and then you need ghost peppers just to feel something.
Just to get that initial kick.
Exactly. Our brains are currently craving digital ghost peppers from the moment we wake up.
To run with that analogy, we have to look at how your brain literally tastes that dopamine. The chemical binds to specific receptors, primarily the D2 receptors in the brain.
Okay, got it.
When you flood the system with those digital ghost peppers all day long, the brain senses a toxic level of neurochemical activity.
So it has to defend itself.
Right. To protect itself from excitotoxicity, the brain initiates a process called downregulation. It literally, physically pulls those D2 receptors back into the cell walls.
Wow. So your baseline capacity to process dopamine just drops.
It completely plummets, yes.
So the receptors just retreat to defend themselves against the flood.
They do, and the psychological result of that cellular retreat is what we call modern burnout.
Ah, that makes so much sense.
The source directly links this downregulation to chronic restlessness, baseline anxiety, and just the overall inability to focus on long-term goals.
Because long-term goals, like, say, writing a book or building a relationship, those offer delayed subtle rewards.
Exactly. They don't provide the massive instantaneous dopamine spike of a viral video.
Right, because your D2 receptors are hiding in the cell walls. Those subtle everyday rewards simply aren't enough to register.
They don't even make a dent.
So what does this all mean for us functionally when we actually try to step away and endure that boredom? Because the solution modern psychology and neuroscience have introduced for this fatigue is this huge trend of the dopamine detox.
Right, the fasting trend.
Yeah. The prescription is to intentionally remove all high stimulation triggers to let the brain heal. But sitting in a quiet room when your brain is actively craving a ghost pepper Sounds agonizing.
Oh, it is agonizing.
Yeah.
And the source explains the mechanics of why that happens.
Okay, I'm curious.
When you abruptly remove the stimulation, your brain defaults to a network called the default mode network, or DMN.
The DMN, right.
Right. In a healthy brain, the DMN is responsible for daydreaming, self-reflection, creativity.
All the good stuff.
Exactly. But in a brain suffering from a dopamine deficit, the DMN goes into absolute overdrive. It produces rumination, anxiety, and a frantic sense of urgency.
So we just feel terrible.
Yes, and we have completely pathologized this feeling. We treat boredom like a medical emergency that must be treated immediately with a screen.
Which just traps us right back in the cycle. We feel the anxiety of the withdrawal, so we reach for the phone to self-medicate.
And that just continues to fry the receptors.
Man.
What's fascinating here is the sheer mechanical simplicity of breaking that cycle, at least according to the clinical data in the source.
Okay, how so?
By intentionally stepping away from the noise and actually enduring that temporary spike in anxiety, you are coaxing those D2 receptors back to the surface of the cell.
You're letting them come out of hiding.
Yes, you are restoring the brain's equilibrium. The clinical results of enduring this forced boredom are profound.
Like what?
Individuals report a massive return of executive function, a drop in baseline anxiety, and most importantly, they get their palate back.
They can taste the subtle flavors of everyday life again.
Exactly.
But knowing you need boredom and actually surviving the withdrawal are two very different things.
Totally different.
If we want a manual for how to endure this withdrawal, this paper argues we shouldn't be looking to Silicon Valley productivity gurus.
No, definitely not.
We need to look at the people who mastered the technology of silence thousands of years ago, and here's where it gets really interesting.
Right.
The scientific term dopamine detox is a modern invention, sure. But the paper's central thesis is that the practice itself is structurally identical to the ancient Christian spiritual disciplines of solitude, silence, and fasting.
It's basically a one-to-one mapping.
The text points to the Desert Fathers in the 3rd century and spiritual giants throughout Scripture who intentionally disconnected from society to guard their minds.
Yes.
But, I have to push back a little bit on the source's premise here. Is a spiritual fast really the exact same thing as just putting your phone on airplane mode?
That's a fair question.
Let's test this. Slapping your phone in a drawer is just the passive absence of input. Entering into spiritual solitude is the active presence of focused reflection.
Right.
So are we just slapping a shiny new label on an old habit, or is there a genuine neurobiological equivalence?
Well, that distinction between passive absence and active reflection is actually where the modern clinical data catches up with the ancient theology.
Really?
Yeah. The paper cites psychological studies on intentionality versus forced boredom. If you lock someone in a room without their phone, and they spend the entire time agonizing over the absence of the device, their stress hormones actually spike.
Like cortisol and adrenaline.
Exactly. They are experiencing a loss of the locus of control.
Right, they are just white-knuckling through an involuntary deprivation.
Yes.
That doesn't sound healing at all.
It's not. But the spiritual disciplines described in the text operate entirely on intentionality and the internal locus of control.
Ah, so it's an active choice.
Precisely. When ancient monks went into the desert, or when an individual today intentionally sets aside time for silence, they're engaging their prefrontal cortex.
Oh, okay.
They're actively directing their attention toward contemplation, prayer, or simply being present.
Right.
The source argues that this active intentionality engages the parasympathetic nervous system.
The rest and digest network.
Yes, and that dramatically accelerates the neuroplasticity required to heal those dopamine receptors.
Okay, that makes sense. The intent and the vocabulary might differ, right? Like one person is seeking a neurochemical baseline reset, and the other is seeking to hear the voice of God.
Right.
But the physical active engagement required to achieve either state forces the brain into the exact same healing posture.
Exactly. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the source argues that human neurobiology has not fundamentally changed in millennia.
Not a bit.
The human organism requires the intentional removal of stimulation to manage its cognitive load.
Whether you analyze that necessity through an fMRI machine or through a theological manuscript.
Yes. And that leads us to the historical case studies the text provides, which show us how this cognitive load management was practiced at the absolute highest levels of demand.
So the ultimate example the document points to is found in the life of Jesus Christ. The text highlights the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 4, where before Jesus even begins his public ministry, he spends 40 days in the wilderness.
Fasting and praying, yes.
Yeah. And the source emphasizes that we need to view this through the lens of cognitive and spiritual preparation, not just a mystical event.
Right. It was an intense, deliberate period of sensory deprivation.
He was systematically clearing away the environmental noise and the immediate physical demands of food.
Yes, to set an absolute baseline of clarity before taking on an overwhelming public mission.
Because if you are about to embark on a mission that is going to demand everything from you, you just can't afford to have your engine running hot before you even start.
No, it would be a disaster.
But the paper doesn't just focus on that 40-day isolated event. It pulls from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 5, which notes that during his extraordinarily busy public ministry,
When crowds were constantly pressing in, right?
yeah, demanding healing, demanding teaching, Jesus, quote, often withdrew to lonely places and prayed.
And the operative word there is often.
Often.
We tend to view solitude as an introvert's luxury, something we do when we finally have some spare time.
If we ever get spare time.
Exactly. But the text argues that for historical figures like Jesus, solitude was a structural necessity for survival.
The crowds represented an immense cognitive and emotional load.
Huge. He recognized that constant public engagement required an aggressive counterbalance of absolute isolation.
He was actively managing his own version of stimulation overload. He couldn't pour out to the crowds if his own baseline was entirely depleted by their demands.
Yes, I see.
And the document reinforces this concept with another phenomenal case study from the Old Testament, the prophet Elijah.
Oh, yes. The narrative of Elijah in 1 Kings chapter 19 provides a perfect psychological profile of profound burnout.
It really does.
Elijah has just experienced these massive public victories, but he is now fleeing for his life into the wilderness.
Just completely drained.
The text describes him as mentally, physically, and spiritually exhausted to the absolute point of despair.
He is completely redlining, the RPMs are maxed out, the engine is smoking, and he just wants to give up entirely.
Yes. And in that state of total depletion, he is waiting in a cave for God to speak to him.
Right. The source points out the fascinating sequence of sensory input that follows.
Okay, what happens?
First, a violent wind comes and tears the mountains apart. But the text explicitly notes God is not in the wind.
Right.
Then an earthquake shakes the ground, but God is not in the earthquake.
And then the fire.
Then a roaring fire sweeps through, but God is not in the fire.
Look at the wind, the earthquake, and the fire in the context of our digital lives today.
Oh, absolutely.
Those are the loud, flashy, high dopamine hits of our modern world. They are the viral videos that hijack our attention, the breaking news alerts that spike our cortisol.
The endless outrage cycles on social media platforms.
Right. We are constantly looking for meaning, or at least some kind of satisfaction, in the earthquakes and the fires of our digital feeds.
We are.
But the story pivots entirely after that massive sensory overload. The source reminds us that the message finally arrives in a gentle whisper, or as some translations put it, a still, small voice.
And this raises an important question about the practical application of this text, which is,
If we analyze the actual physics of a whisper, it demands something specific from the listener.
silence.
Exactly. To hear a whisper, your environment must be completely devoid of competing noise.
If a television is blaring or if your brain is buzzing from an hour of doom scrolling, a whisper is entirely imperceptible.
You'll miss it completely.
Yeah.
The source connects this to a consistent biblical principle. Cognitive and spiritual clarity are found in quietness.
Like Psalm 46.10.
Right, the command, be still and know that I am God.
It's an active command. Be still. It doesn't say wait for stillness to happen to you because the world will never naturally offer you stillness.
No, never.
You have to aggressively manufacture the silence so you can actually hear the whisper.
And that active manufacturing of silence is the shared technology of both the ancient monk and the modern neuroscientist.
That's such a great way to put it.
The wind, the earthquake, and the fire will always grab your attention. Just like a dopamine spike grabs your attention, it's biologically unavoidable.
Right.
But they do not offer the sustaining truth, nor do they offer the baseline reset that the prefrontal cortex and the soul actually require to function without burning out.
It's a compelling synthesis because it entirely demystifies these ancient texts for a modern reader. We read about monks going into the desert or prophets hiding in caves, and we often brush it off as purely mystical, almost magical behavior that has no bearing on our modern optimized
Right,
lives.
we think it's disconnected from us.
Exactly. But when you map their actions onto the precise cellular mechanics of dopamine downregulation, it makes total practical sense.
It's highly practical.
They were engaging in high-level cognitive load management,
They understood intuitively what clinical data is now proving empirically.
which is
The human nervous system is simply not architected to process an infinite stream of input.
we'd break down.
We do break down. We require extended periods of absolute emptiness to maintain our executive function and our psychological well-being.
Which brings us to the core takeaway of this entire deep dive. For you listening right now, managing a career, a family, and a smartphone that never stops buzzing, the relevance couldn't be more immediate.
It really couldn't.
Whether you prefer the clinical framing of rewiring your D2 receptors via a dopamine detox, or you prefer the theological framing of guarding your soul through sacred stillness, the prescribed remedy is identical.
The exact same action.
When you feel that chronic restlessness, when your attention span is fractured and your baseline anxiety is just creeping up, you don't need a new productivity system.
Right.
You don't need another calendar app or a time-blocking hack you found on a bustling social feed. You need the ancient, incredibly difficult, and deeply biological practice of silence.
Yes.
You have to intentionally choose the temporary anxiety of boredom to let the engine stop redlining.
You have to cultivate the internal and external environment where a whisper can actually be processed.
Right.
By actively turning off the noise and embracing the quiet, you aren't just taking a break. You are participating in a structural tradition of human healing that spans thousands of years.
And as we wrap up, there is one final thought that emerges from all this source material, something I really want you to mull over and explore on your own long after you finish listening today.
Yeah.
We've just discussed how this paper reveals that ancient figures like Jesus and Elijah required intense, intentional periods of absolute isolation and silence to reset their minds, manage their cognitive load, and fight off burnout.
Right.
They had to aggressively retreat from the crowds to maintain their clarity. But remember the historical reality of their lives. They lived in an agrarian society.
Completely different world.
Completely. This was an era long before smartphones, before constant push notifications, before a 247 global digital news cycle.
Even before artificial lighting existed to keep us stimulated after the sun went down.
Exactly. The absolute baseline of their daily world was already incredibly quiet by our modern standards. So if extended periods of absolute silent isolation were considered a biological and spiritual necessity for human survival back then, well, just how dangerously unnatural is the baseline level of noise we are forcing our brains to endure today? It really makes you wonder if our engines were ever built to run this fast.